Yes, I'll go ahead and start. We do have a cancellation for today. Kevin Grove was not able to make it. Mark Sleeman said that he should be joining, but he's not here right now. So if he comes in, then later we can introduce him later. But I just want to give a brief introduction to the neuroscience section. Maybe some of y'all are aware, maybe you're not, that the Obesity Society has started the neuroscience section for this year. The section goal is to try and work at the intersection of obesity and neuroscience research, and the section is led by a committee. The committee includes myself. I'm Kevin Williams at UT Southwestern in Dallas, Texas, acting as the chair. For this year, Darlene Sandoval at the University of Colorado, who's on the call here, is the chair-elect, so she'll be the chair next year. Catherine Kotz from University of Minnesota is acting as the past chair. And then Jeffrey Zigman from UT Southwestern and Ames Sutton Hickey from Temple University are at-large members for the committee. As part of our initiatives, we organized 2 virtual seminars for this year. The one has already happened. It happened in May, and that was on science communication and a path to diverse careers through that aspect. And then the seminar today is on academia and industry, knowing why, when, and how to make the move. We're hoping that these seminars can provide a platform that might be outside the norm, that explores diverse career possibilities and opportunities for career growth for members of the section. And I should throw in here that we're actually just recently, within the last week or so, we announced call for nominations for 2 positions within the neuroscience section committee. So we're looking for a chair-elect for next year. The chair-elect ultimately becomes the chair of the committee, as well as a membership at large member. So if you're interested in joining this committee, be sure to email Darlene or myself. We're also advertising for a student representative for the committee. So please reach out if you're interested in that as well. We're also excited that the Obesity Society meeting is coming to Dallas. It's going to be here in mid-October, and we have a session at that meeting. It's going to occur on Sunday, October 15th at 5:30 p.m. And what we're planning on doing is highlighting a few abstracts that have been submitted and giving them blitz talks in the session. Diana Cummings from NIH will also be there discussing grant opportunities for investigators at all levels. And it should be a great social event as well to get to know people that are interested in similar research. So please join us there. For the structure of this, we're trying to keep it so that most of the people that are unmuted, or the moderator and the panelists, if you're interested in trying to ask a question, please type into the chat. We might be able to have a Q&A to where some people become unmuted, but we might need to read those chat questions. The moderator for today is going to be Ames. So I'm going to turn it over to Ames for the rest of the session. So go ahead.
Awesome. Thanks, Kevin. So I'll be the moderator for today. I think what we'll do first is just go through and do a brief introduction of all of the panelists. So what I'll do is I'll just mention everybody's name and their current title. And if you all, as I mention you, I'll then give you maybe a 1 to 2 minute slot where you could introduce yourselves, kind of how you interact and or interacted with both academia and industry. And then we'll go from there with some more directed questions at specific individuals. So with that, I'll start with Dr. Kendra Bence, who is currently the Executive Director of the Internal Medicine Research Unit and the Cardiovascular and Metabolic Diseases Research Unit at Pfizer. Kendra, do you mind unmuting and giving a brief introduction more broadly about your experience in both academia and industry?
Sure. Thank you, Ames. It's great to see everybody, see some familiar faces, and good afternoon to those who have joined this call. So I've had an interesting zigzag in the middle of my career, which is why I'm on this panel today. I did my PhD at Cornell Medical School and was very interested in signal transduction, did a lot of work with protein phosphatases, and that led me to Harvard Medical School for my postdoc, where I worked at the Beth Israel. Actually met Terry back then at that time while I was a postdoc, and got quite interested in the role of PGP1B and the regulation of metabolic signaling pathways. So even though it was actually an oncology postdoc lab that I was in, I that was my first exposure to metabolic disease and obesity, and I was really hooked and surrounded by just fantastic colleagues there at Beth Israel. Then I transitioned to a faculty position at the University of Pennsylvania. I was there for 10 years, running a lab studying neural control of feeding behavior and energy balance. Had tenure, had actually just renewed my R01 when I got an interesting call from Maury Birnbaum, who was also at Penn, close friend and collaborator over the years I was there, and he had recently taken a role at Pfizer to be the chief scientific officer, and he recruited me there to run an obesity group, which was quite small at the time. And we can get back to this later about why I decided to go. It was not an easy decision. Obviously, I took the job. I've been here almost 8 years, and I'm really enjoying what I'm doing now, which is leading the obesity and NASH research groups here.
Awesome. Thanks, Kendra. And we will definitely come back to some of those topics as we ask some of the more directed questions. So thanks for that. We'll next go to our next panelist, which is Dr. Terry Maratos-Flier, who's the clinical director at Alnylam Pharmaceuticals in Cambridge currently. Terry, do you mind?
Sure. Thanks, Ames. I like as Kendra said, I know her from the BI. I also know Jeff Sigmund from when he was a fellow at the BI. It feels like a really long time ago in a galaxy far away. So I was a PI for a very long time, NIH funded, running a small to medium lab. And I got an inquiry in 2018 that came out of the blue. It was like I wasn't looking for a job in pharma. I was actually considering how I was going to manage to write 2 NIH grants and get them funded. And it was from Novartis, and it was to join their research group, their clinical research group at NIBR, which is in Cambridge. And, it was a hard decision because I hadn't really thought about going into pharma. And I was very used to being in academic medicine. And a lot of people said, how can you possibly transition from being a PI to being a member of a team where you have a hierarchy? There's no doubt that there's a hierarchy. You're not running your small business anymore. And I decided to do it. I'm really glad I did. I really enjoyed Novartis. And then after about 4 years, I felt I had maxed out on what I was learning at Novartis, which is a big, huge international pharma. And I started looking, I was getting like these inquiries like from on LinkedIn, and somebody said, are you interested in a job at Alnylam, which is a 2,000 person company and has some very interesting novel RNAi therapies. And I decided to do that. And yeah, it's really interesting. I don't regret having made the transition. And actually, Mark Sleeman popped on the screen, and he and I talked to each other because we have some interesting collaborations. And what I think interestingly, also like Kendra, I now do both some brain stuff and some liver stuff. So if you're doing obesity, all my work was originally focused on central and mechanisms of energy expenditure, and then some stuff related to non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. I'm happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Terry. Mark, I saw that you just joined the call. So what we're doing is doing a very brief introduction. And I'll briefly introduce what your current role is. But if you don't mind going in a little bit more detail about your experience, both in academia and industry and everything in between. And we're trying to keep it between 1 to 2 minutes. So Dr. Mark Sleeman is the head of obesity, muscle, and metabolism research at Regeneron Pharmaceuticals currently, and he also serves, I believe, as an adjunct at Yale. I don't know how up to date that is, but if you wouldn't mind going into that in some more depth, Mark.
Yes, hi. Hi, everyone. Sorry I'm late. Yes, combined maybe 20 years in industry and about 15 years in academia. That's how old I am. But sort of originally was on an academic path, did my postdoc, University of Massachusetts Medical School, was firmly on sort of a tenure track, got recruited to a biotech company, small biotech company, spent about 15 years there, and then went back to academia, back to Australia. You can tell I'm Australian. had a professorial position there doing basic research and discovery, and then decided to give that up to come back to the States and joined the same company. I'm fortunate to be recruited to the same company twice, and now back doing discovery research, and therapeutic development. And as Terry just said, we've got a lot of collaborations, both academic as well as industrial partners as well. So a lot of experience in both sides of the coin, I would say. So anyway, very happy to join.
Great.
And yes,
thanks.
I still hold a position at Yale and also one at Monash University in Australia.
Oh, awesome. Great. Thanks so much. Okay, we'll move to Dr. Aaron Mercer, who is currently a senior principal scientist of external innovation at Boehringer Ingelheim. You can fix me with that pronunciation, Aaron. Yeah.
No, Ames, you were great. That's I think sometimes it's a mouthful for me also because it's a long German name. So great to meet everybody on the call. Brief introduction for myself. So I was trained as a neuroscientist. I actually cut my teeth in my PhD year studying synaptic transmission in the retina of all tissues. So I was not in the obesity space at all. I did start running marathons and getting really into nutrition, and I thought, well, I don't want to give up this PhD that I'm working towards. How can I apply it? So I opted to do my postdoc training with Malcolm Lowe at the University of Michigan, where I studied the synaptic architecture of POMC neurons in the hypothalamus. I think unlike many of the others on the call, I guess in this panel, I was much more junior when I jumped off to industry. My inflection point was essentially that a few of my postdoc projects were being used as fuel for the lab's R1. And at the time I thought, well, if I can't publish these right now because they're the outgoing data, I might need to find an actual job in the meantime. Maybe I can't stay on the academic track. Thankfully, I was able to land a spot with Novo Nordisk in Seattle. So I kind of took my love of neuroanatomy and continued to apply that in the obesity space. So I started out there as a much more technically focused scientist. So setting up and leading the histology and imaging unit. From there, I progressed to generating new therapeutic concepts in obesity and also leading some of our external programs with University of Michigan and with a small biotech called Fauna Bio in the Bay Area. So now I think, Ames, we can get into this sort of throughout the panel discussion, of course, as much as Novo Nordisk is in the news. I actually made the decision to leave. I think it was similar to Terry. Felt like I had kind of maxed what I could learn and where I could go. So I jumped off to join Boehringer Ingelheim back in January. And now I'm a lab head, so I have 3 direct reports, and I actually straddle both the obesity and NASH space. And one final plug, I guess, is we actually have some open calls for partnering with academics. I'm not going to blast them in the chat or do a long spiel here, but if you find me on LinkedIn, we have those. So if some of the academics on the call are interested, you can take a look.
Great. Thanks, Aaron. And then for our last panelist, before we dive into some more directed questions, is Dr. Bharath Mani, who's currently the scientific director of the obesity research team at Novo Nordisk in Boston.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. It is nice to see a lot of familiar faces in the panel and in the audience too. My name is Bharath Mani. I'm a scientific director with Novo Nordisk in the obesity research group. Throughout my career, I just took whatever interested me. I went to vet school, did not want to practice treating buffaloes and cattle. Research was something that interested me, so I took a research job in the pharma industry, drug discovery, first starting with asthma, then moving on to cardiometabolic diseases, mainly renovascular hypertension. That is something that really interested me, so then I wanted to do a research degree. I moved from India to the United States to do a PhD in cardiovascular pharmacology to understand the role of some ion channels in regulating vascular tone. A lot of patch clamp electrophysiology and in vivo studies. Then after I finished my PhD, I wanted to do something completely different. So I went to metabolism research in UT Southwestern in Jeff Sigmund's lab, who is in the audience today. I was a postdoc in this lab for 4 years, then as an instructor for another 3 years. My intention was always to go back to the pharma industry, but I overstayed in the academia because science was something that interested me. So I came to an inflection point where I thought if I get a big grant and get a head start, I would stay in academia, which was not the case. So I just moved back to the industry in Novo Nordisk, Indianapolis. I joined here as a senior scientist, and I just started as a scientific director in Boston. I'm still placed in Indianapolis, but I'll be moving to Cambridge soon, or I should say Lexington.
Awesome. Thanks so much. So my first question that is a bit more directed kind of builds on what almost all of you talked about, which was kind of that inflection point and where you decided to switch from, one career track to the next, specifically thinking about academia to industry or from industry to academia back and forth. And so I'd love to I'm going to direct this first to Terry. Do you remember any specific moments that you had that made it more, that made you want to transition? Was there any pivotal moment from one to the next, or was it kind of a build up gradually? And do you remember any specific conversations that were particularly insightful?
Yeah, it's actually a really good question. It wasn't a pivotal moment. It was kind of a buildup, and part of the buildup was, even though I was funded, I was concerned about getting the next grant. I think somebody mentioned that. Would I be able to maintain that? And the other thing that I noticed was that as time went on, it was much easier to keep doing what you were doing if you wanted to maintain NIH funding. It's hard to make a leap into something that's really novel. And so the two areas I was in was MCH, which is a neuropeptide, and FGF21, which is a hepatic factor. And I thought, I could spin out potentially another decade so of funding, but it's going to be getting narrower and narrower. And I was kind of shocked when I got this email that said, "Are you interested in a position at Novartis?" And I was kind of like, well, I don't know, am I? And it took me a while. It took me about 4 months to make that decision because it was going to be a really big deal. And I knew, I'm a grandma, so I knew I wasn't going to go back to academia. I wasn't like, I was like, 40 years old and I was going to do this and then think about another switch. But yeah, it was a buildup.
Awesome. Thanks so much. I'd love to hear a take from somebody else on the call. So maybe Mark, did you have a similar experience in regards to switching back and forth between the two? Or
well, I think a few people have touched on it. Obviously sort of being junior faculty and being daunted by the prospect of spending many years grinding away in the lab, trying to get an R01 and the like was pretty daunting. Also coming from Australia and trying to settle, I decided to stay in the States. So that was a huge bar to climb over. I suppose and I went and interviewed at a small biotech, and that's now grown into a large biotech. But I remember coming here, the biggest thing for me was the collaborative nature of the science. And I'm not trying to tout up our company, but I found that everyone working at a small company had a very joint focus and they bought into the concept that if you succeed, we all succeed. And I'd never sort of experienced something like that. So it was only after I opened myself and let myself go out and sort of see what the other side was, because remember that it was the dark side back then. And, the academia was the white pillar of, pure research. And so I was sort of a bit shocked by that. The other side of it, well, why did I go back to academia? I think someone was saying, yes, you do sort of wear out in some of these positions. And I sort of reached a level and decided, well, academia is sort of a place of innovation. And I really wanted to recapture some innovation. And freedom to do research. So it was a great transition. So they're the two sides that I can really relate to. The second one is a little bit more complex, but I'll leave that for a different question.
Okay, that sounds great. Thanks, Mark. And I kind of wanted to build off of what you talked about, which is that there are some unique benefits to academia. And so I'd love to hear from some of you all if you see anything in particular that's a unique advantage in academia and how this compares to some of the benefits of working in industry. Because I know that there are some similarities, and kind of talking about how you can identify those and even just try and pull those out when you're working in industry versus academia. So Kendra, do you mind tackling this question first? That'd be great.
Sure, yeah. I think, one of the challenges going from academia to industry, at least for me, was the pace at which industry moves. It's extremely fast. And I think in academia, you have a little, you're just as busy, but it's a different kind of busy. I feel like your time is a bit more flexible in academia. Once you get to industry, you are scheduled. I mean, I have a person that their only job is to manage my calendar, and I have appointments from 8 to 5, and it's nonstop. And that was a huge change for me. I was used to kind of, having the freedom to sit in my office and read papers all afternoon and think about my next grant idea. So I think that's, definitely one of the contrasts. I think that a great similarity for me that was a welcome surprise is the, at least at Pfizer, and I know at many of my colleagues' companies here, we have a very strong postdoc program. And I didn't know that when I took the position. And one of the things I was really worried about was losing that passion I have for training. And I just love, being in the lab and training graduate students and rotation students and mentoring postdocs. And I thought I was leaving that behind. So it was actually a pleasant surprise to find out that, no, we have a global postdoc program, and I've been able to continue to mentor many postdocs in addition to my day job, as it were. So it's been a great outlet, just something to keep in mind that does exist in industry as well.
That's awesome. I have heard about the postdoc programs. Bharath, do you mind talking first of all, do you all at Novo have a postdoc program like that? And then also kind of piggybacking on some of those comments that Kendra made, to any unique advantages that you saw in academia and how that compares to your experience at Novo?
Yeah, sure. To answer your first question, yes, we do have a robust postdoc as well as a PhD student program. It is called Novo Star, but you need a liaison within Novo Nordisk to apply for it. That is also competitive. That postdoc can be done as a hybrid system or within the university or just exclusively within Novo for a certain period of time. To answer your second question, I have been back and forth between academia and industry. If I want to characterize this in just 2 words, freedom and reward. Freedom, definitely more in the university, less so in academia. Reward also depends on what you characterize as reward. So if you think a nature paper is something that rewards you best, then there are opportunities both in the industry and academia. There are a substantial basic research activity in the industry as well, but again, it is going to be dictated by the company, particularly in a for-profit company. But there are also other rewards within the industry. Your salary is significantly higher in the industry compared to academia, but that also comes with the risk of changing jobs that a lot of folks in the panel already described, which is somewhat more stable in academia. So I have good both in academia and industry, but I should say I have enjoyed both the jobs, and I'm very happy with what I have been doing right now. So which I felt is very, very, very rewarding.
Awesome. Thanks so much. And then I think we'll ask one more person. Aaron, do you mind chiming in? Do you have any unique perspectives on the advantages, don't know why that word was difficult, of academia that you've been able to find in industry and or that you miss that are no longer present.
Yeah, I would say personally, I actually, maybe I'm the odd man out, I really miss publishing. I really like to complete a story and have a narrative to tell. And for me personally, there's a lot of gratification in the publication aspect of academia. In pharma, I would say it's very rarely ever in the top 10 of my to-do list, just because there's so many other things that are a higher priority. And that's typically, you know, where are you at in the pipeline and how fast can you get things to your next milestone? I would say the other, you know, there's different pros and cons, I think, in terms of, you can argue that pharma, of course, has a bigger research budget than academia. On the other hand, I think in terms of freedom to operate in intellectual property, academia, an example would be transgenic animal models. In many cases, a pharma company is going to pay tens of thousands of dollars to license one in to do some studies. So in many cases, I think the way that we try to synergize still with academia, then if we need those pivotal studies completed, we partner up. We'll pay for the work, we'll pay for the postdoc time. We also do, you know, as parts of some of these programs, I was involved with one at Novo, where we partnered with 3 PIs at the University of Michigan. So we helped build out the postdocs projects, but we also were able to use those for some of our early preclinical drug target work. So there's ways also to synergize to get the best of both worlds.
Awesome. Thanks, Aaron. And Mark, you have your hand up. Do you want to add something?
Yeah, I would just like to add that you're trying to classify industry versus academia. I would like to propose that it's a spectrum, and you know, from one side we have total freedom and creativity in academia, but you know, I don't think we should overlook biotech. And biotech is a small, innovative place that combines both. They're well funded, they're very innovative, they're very nimble, they're very quick. When I joined Regeneron, that's exactly what it was. The other, you know, I think we've sort of merged, you know, the general evolution of a company. We're sort of now more sort of on the industry pharmaceutical side of things, like some of the other large pharmas, you know, Boehringer, you know, Novo, etc. So, and Pfizer, they're all very big. So, but they all have a spectrum of things to offer. So don't just class one, you know, as it industry and academia. You can get, there's many hybrid sort of situations in there.
Yeah,
Can
that's
I add to that?
Yeah, go ahead, Terry. Yep.
Yeah, I haven't figured out how to raise my hand here. Sorry.
No, that's just good. Perfect.
Yeah, no, so I would actually add to that it's very diverse, and what you do in industry is also very diverse, and it's very much dependent on what job you take and where you're taking it. So one of the things that was really important to me was I'm a data junkie. So I took a translational style role in both the jobs that I have. So I get to talk to bench scientists every day and try and figure out what the interface between what they're doing in a mouse or in a non-human primate is, and what would happen if we did if we put it into humans. And you know, you can take a job in academia, and there are people who do it and they love it, where they're doing phase 3 trials, and they're not interested in you know, what's happening in the mouse. They're interested in what happened in your early trials, in your phase 1 and your phase 2, and you know, and in coordinating these very large trials, which Novo Nordisk is famous for their GLP-1 receptor agonists. So it's not an either or in a lot of ways, both in who you're interacting with and what you're exactly doing. If you know, I was actually recently asked if I wanted to pursue something into a phase 3 trial. I said, no, I want to work with the bench scientist and hear what the new data is. So it's not an either or, it's a very mixed bag.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. Bharath, you want to add in something?
Yeah, I just want to also emphasize what Mark was mentioning earlier. It is a continuum. It is not an either or phenomenon at all. Even while we are still working in big pharma, we collaborate quite a bit with academic research. We see data. Science is what drives innovation. It is not the companies and people who drive innovation. Science is the backbone. for all that we do. That being said, so when I transitioned from Jeff Zigman's lab in UT Southwestern, I came to Novo, which at that time was called a transformational research unit. So we were operating like a small biotech company within the walls of pharma. So we were very nimble, very, very quick within the company. We were half and half biologists, chemists, technologists together, sitting in the same room, worked like a small biotech company. Our decisions were faster, our movements were much quicker. Now that transformational research unit is dissolved and we are getting integrated into the big pharma. And I already feel that I have been sailing in a boat, moving quickly. Now I am getting into a ship, which is moving slowly. But again, when the ship moves, it can pack a punch. So I see the advantage to that, but I can really see the difference between working as a biotech company and a pharma company here. It's a big difference.
Yeah, I guess something to build on that is, you know, biotech seems to be something that's really booming, especially in the Cambridge, Massachusetts area. When I was at MIT doing my first postdoc, I saw that a ton. And so I guess, does anybody else have any experience or info just on what the differences are just between biotech and, you know, typical pharma? Because I think that, at least from my perspective, when I was starting out my PhD or even in undergraduate, I didn't know that much about biotech. I don't even think it was that big yet. And so since that is booming, what are the comparisons that folks can make? Bharath, you mentioned this a little bit, but like, what are the comparisons that you can make from a day-to-day experience in a biotech versus a big pharma situation? And obviously we know there's a spectrum there as well, but does anybody have any insight into those comparisons? Maybe Bharath, you could start off and talk about that a little bit more.
So I did not work in a biotech, but I was working as a biotech within Novo. But when you work as a biotech, you are always selling your product to someone at some stage, which is what we were doing. We were generating something useful, and we were passing that on into the bigger organization, which was Novo Nordisk. So again, your main aim is to mature your idea into a discovery project and sell that. And that is what biotechs do. They do not have the capacity. They are not vertically integrated to take this all along. But you can learn a lot of things if you start your career in a biotech company. Like I have learned a lot about technology and clinical sciences, medical sciences, and I also lead projects in the cardiorenal space and obesity space. So I got to interact with a lot of people within the wider organization in a very, very short period of time. That is usually not the case when you start in a big pharma. You are put into certain therapy area or a certain lab, and then you are very, very modular and structured. So I mean, if it was for me, I would start with the biotech company. Not, I mean, obviously it is pharma companies are alternative choices, but I would go start my career in a biotech company.
Great. Terry, you want to add something on?
Yeah, I actually, so I worked in a really big pharma, and I have no idea how representative Novartis is compared to, let's say, Pfizer, but it was very siloed. And it's also, I mean, it's a Swiss company, so I think some of the siloing is potentially related to the fact that they're Swiss, even though I was working at their Cambridge site. The other thing is, you know, you do get an assignment, like you're in cardiovascular metabolic, and that's it, right? And there's a lot less flexibility to move around and to say, you know, I have expertise on that project you have in the liver, and I'd like to participate in it. In the 4 years that I was at Novartis, the guy who was the head of the Cambridge unit, I never met with him once, and I have a lot more input into the kind of that clinical basic science interface at Alnylam, and I actually get to meet with two of the senior vice presidents on a regular basis, because, you know, I mean, I have expertise in obesity, metabolism, appetite regulation, and it's valued. Whereas I really think at Novartis it was kind of whatever, you know. I don't know what Kendra might be a good person to say, how does it happen at Pfizer? Are they as siloed? But that to me was a big difference.
Yeah, I mean, it's, I
Yeah,
think
go ahead,
any,
Kendra.
yeah, any big company, right? You have to build some kind of silos, or it's chaos. But yeah, I agree somewhat with what you're saying. You know, I think I have a lot of friends that have gone to biotech. I've seen a lot of people transition from pharma to biotech. And I think one of the biggest differences is, you know, biotech tends, you might be working on a single program, and they might have just one program, and the fate of the company relies on the success of that program. And you know, I've seen people be super passionate about that program, but if it doesn't make it, sometimes the company goes under or loses their venture funding, and they end up having to look for another job. And I've seen some people cycle through, you know, many biotechs in less than 5 years, and maybe that's okay. It depends what you want to do and at what point you are in your career. If, you know, some people find that very exciting. It's like, you know, especially the younger generation these days, they have shorter attention spans anyway. You know, I think they're more in tune with moving around and maybe not working for a big company for the rest of their career. So I think it's just something to keep in mind. It's not necessarily a plus or a minus. You know, I think at a bigger company, if you're in a unit like a cardiovascular metabolic research unit, you're going to be working on a portfolio of targets. And if one goes down, there's another one coming, and it's more of a churn of projects rather than kind of end of the world, I think, if one doesn't make it.
Yeah, and I can add on to what Kendra had highlighted. I think I've partnered with biotech, so I haven't worked at a biotech myself, but the perspective I have is typically whether you're a discovery company, you know, very much in the early preclinical space, or you're working towards something as an IPO, or you want to get acquired by big pharma. In many cases, I've seen where it's a rather short runway in terms of the just the time to either your next round of VC funding or when does that IPO go live. And so there's a certain risk willingness to take, I think, to be in the biotech space. It can be exciting for people, and likely, I mean, one argument for being in the Boston, Cambridge area is even if there's that kind of instability, I guess, within the companies, there's so many there. You know, the likelihood of being long without a job is probably rather low. That being said, this is probably something I don't know if we'll touch on this, Ames, but it's not to say that big pharma also doesn't come without its own restructuring and challenges there as well. But I think it's typically you're in a bit more of a silo, and it's more of a project churn as you're trying to maintain a pipeline.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Aaron. Mark, did you want to add anything on, or did something get mentioned already?
I think you touched on a lot of those points, but I think one of the things we try and avoid, especially where I am currently, is we try and avoid these silos. We have open office and meetings with our CSO and even our CEO, and they encourage people at all levels to speak. And one of the exciting things about early biotech is this close interaction with thought leaders and really dynamic people that is very rare and can be a little bit addictive. And because they push the envelope on things, on thought processes, on research, on science. They're intimately involved. It's hard work. You'll spend nights, you know, to 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night working there, but it's just like academia, you know, and so there's pluses and minuses. I agree. As the companies grow, you do tend to have a lot more structure come down from above, and sort of directed goals and timelines and the like. So it's got a bit of both things in it. So.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark. I'll move on to our next question, which is more tailored to asking you all for advice if you're thinking about, if folks in the audience are thinking about switching from one career to the next, specifically, I think from academia to industry. Are there any skill sets that you can think of that folks should be prioritizing? And I know this might be unique to depending on what career stage individuals are at. So you can take this kind of in whatever direction, whatever career stage you're thinking of, or as it applied to the switches that you made in your career. Are there any specific skills that folks might not be thinking about that might be transferable if they're considering jumping to biotech, big pharma, whatever industry is of interest? And I think we can start this with Kendra, if you have any insights specific to what you have experienced.
I think the most important thing is the ability to communicate clearly, you know, and have good interactions with other people. I think a few people have mentioned project teams in industry tend to be highly matrixed. You're working across what we call partner lines. You know, you're working with the chemists and the people in pharmacodynamics and the clinicians, and you need to have those soft skills to be able to be effective in even a senior scientist role, which would be, you know, the first stepping stone out of a postdoc. I think people, when they're in academia and they're considering a switch to industry, tend to over-focus on the skills listed in the application. I actually think, though, I think of those as like a nice to have. It'd be great if you had experience in these 12 techniques, but if you show me that you've been successful in the role you're in now, that you're publishing, that you're a good team player, that you can communicate, that you're presenting at conferences, you know, to me, we'll teach you the how to use whatever machine it is that you're going to be using in the lab. You're probably going to, even if you have skills in that in academia, the machines look different in industry. Sometimes there's a lot more robotics. You're going to be learning it anyway. So I think, you know, be open to be open-minded about some of the roles you think you might not be qualified for, and go ahead and apply. And you know, also, I would say, even if you think you're not quite ready to accept a job offer and make the move, interview anyway, because you can always say no, right? If you interview and then you panic and you decide, you know, I don't feel like this is the right fit, you can say no. It's okay. It happens all the time. So I think getting out there, doing the interviews, getting a sense of what kind of jobs are available, is only going to be positive in the end, and you'll grow your network while you're doing that.
Awesome. And we have a question in the chat that is kind of building off of what you were mentioning, Kendra, which is, I believe Haley asked, do you have any advice for people who want to switch to industry right out of their PhD? So no postdoc. So I know a lot of us have heard you should go start a postdoc, get some postdoc experience. You may get a higher salary, things like that. So this individual is asking about types of roles that you should look for if you're thinking about just doing straight out of PhD, and how would you make the connections to get hired? So I think, could we maybe, Terry, would you mind jumping in here and giving some advice?
Yeah, sure. We have a couple of people at Alnylam who did not do postdocs. They came straight out of their PhD lab. Usually what you need if you're doing that, you do need 1 or 2 or 3 manuscripts to show that you kind of had productivity, or the productivity is impending, and nobody cares, honestly, about Nature Cell or Science. If you're in industry, like, forget about it. We don't care. Spending 5 years to get that Nature paper may not be the best use of your time. There is a learning curve, and you have to expect a longer learning curve if you have not done a postdoc. So some of the people I've been working with and have not done postdocs, it kind of shows, and then it kind of shows how they're catching up as time goes on. Whatever you do, I think Kendra said it, you need to network. The jobs are very varied. You can go in as like a statistician. You can go in to do, modeling, modeling drug responses. You can go in as a bench scientist. They're very varied. You can go in as the animal safety person. And so if you know anyone that does these jobs, like one of your friends, colleagues, ex-postdocs, I recommend just networking like crazy. And how you present yourself. I think Kendra alluded to it. When most of my postdoctoral fellows went into industry, I kind of followed them. And when I would ask them, like, show me your industry CV, and they'd be focusing, I can run a gel. It's like, no, that's not really what they care about. It's like, how are you thinking conceptually, kind of what's your area of deep expertise. So, that's also something like, if you have a friend who's got a job in industry, ask them to look at their industry CV. But networking, and be on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is like kind of one of those jokes when you're an academic, like, LinkedIn, what's that? But once you get into industry, being on LinkedIn becomes important, because job opportunities appear there. You may get contacted by a search firm, and completely agree with Kendra. Interview, and you can always say no. So
Awesome. Thanks so much, Terry. Aaron, you want to add something on there?
Yeah, I think I'd also recommend, if you're looking into industry jobs, and again, if you're on LinkedIn, in many cases, there's a recruiter that's attached to many job postings, especially at big pharma. Ask informational questions. If you have been networking or know who, say, the hiring manager is, or somebody in the department, same thing. Ask for an informational interview to kind of learn the ropes on what's expected in that role at that title, or if you're trying to go in with a PhD and no postdoc, what does your career development look like there? I think the one piece I would also give, this is in general, also, again, it's very critical to ask about the development piece, because I know a lot of people assume, well, you might be in a role for 5 years at a company and then you just get leveled up. Everywhere I've worked, that's not the case. So it's really good to figure out, where do you go in with your specific skill set from your PhD, and then what does that trajectory look like over time? I think mainly just to figure out, is that the right fit for you?
Awesome. Bharath, you want to add on?
Yeah, I just want to emphasize what Kendra said earlier. So bench science does not always translate to the industry, while science and your critical thinking is the common denominator in both places. What translates is, if you find the industry jobs, you would see only less than 10% of the people who come from academia to industry do the bench science. Obviously it will be skewed more at the junior levels who do the bench science. What you will gradually learn is a lot of work within the industry involves your ability to think critically of the problem, react to it, and effectively communicate that. So that is where most of the jobs within the industry lies. And the jobs it is just not R&D. The jobs in industry are very, very wide, starting from regulatory medical affairs to R&D. So you are not looking into just the bench science. When it comes to pharma companies, there are very, very varying degree of jobs available within the pharma industry, like external innovation, like what Aaron is doing, that does not involve bench science at all, but it requires very, very effective communication skills and scientific acumen to what he communicates. So what I would advise for newcomers, either coming right out of PhD or as a postdoc, is brush up your communication skills. That is very, very critical in the industry. It is not your ability to do glucose clamps or patch clamp electrophysiology. It is your ability to understand and approach who can do it and how can you do it better. And that is what matters more in industry.
Can I just add something really quick to it? I would, it's my personal bias, but I would just put a plug for doing the postdoc. I know when you're done with your PhD, you're eager to just be done with this whole thing and, move on to making money. But I think, if you're in that boat and you're considering industry, we tend to have shorter postdocs in industry, and you're paid a lot better than an academic postdoc. So that's just another route to consider, is maybe a 2 to 3 year industry postdoc to see if you like it. You might think you're going to love industry and then find out, I really kind of miss the academic freedom and the campus and the feel of everything that goes with that. And it's just a plug to kind of stick with the postdoc. I think it's also the part in your career where you really learn all of those things that we just said were really critical: how to be independent, how to independently design experiments, how to manage resources, how to manage people, how to interact with people, but you're still in sort of a protected state when you're a postdoc, versus if you get hired as a senior scientist, you're going to be held accountable and you're going to be given people to mentor and resources to spend, and you might not be as successful. And as Terry mentioned, you might take you longer to move up the ladder. So in the end, you're not necessarily advancing your career any faster in industry, because it's probably going to take you a little bit longer to get those skills under your belt and get that next promotion.
Awesome. Thanks, Kendra. So we have two more questions set up. One of them is somewhat logistical, but we got a couple of questions in the chat about this, which is, what are the specific rules when hiring scientists who are foreigners? So this could apply, obviously, some of the companies that you all work for are US based, some are based in other countries. So foreigners just meaning, I suppose, not where the company is located or based. And so I think some folks have questions because some of the job ads that folks have seen say specifically one thing or the other. So I think we can leave this somewhat open-ended. Whoever has an opinion can maybe chime in. And then we have one more question that we want to get to. So this is more of a logistical thing that I think folks are wondering about. Does anybody in particular on the panel have, oh, Bharath, yeah.
Yeah, I think I can talk to it much better than most of the panelists because of the nature of question here. I came from India and I was on a visa, which means you are not eligible for most grants if you are in academia. And while some companies are open to jobs on visa, it is not really encouraged unless this is a specific person who you want to hire. So if you're someone who wants to start in the industry, then there are still visa avenues to jump into the industry. I have a colleague who is on an O visa that Novo sponsored for him. So it is possible, but it is certainly difficult, and it also is a challenging environment in academia because you will not be eligible for something like an KO1 grant, which gives you a head start in the academic space. So that is a challenge that will continue to be, unfortunately, a challenge.
Okay, great, thanks. Mark, go ahead.
Can I just briefly, I mean, we don't look at it as a barrier, I think, and we just look for the most qualified person for that particular position. We do support people, but we have to make a justification that, you know, if we are employing someone who is from another country, that this skill set doesn't exist within the United States, and that we are not displacing a person doing it. But we support people in all phases of their applications, for processes, for citizenship, for green cards, for whatever. So I think there's a lot of support, but it goes around the applicability for the job. Having just, you know, a large number of applications from people who don't have qualifications is really difficult.
Okay, awesome. Thanks. And then we're going to go to our last question now, which is, this is the Obesity Society that's hosting this. So we would like to get your all's input or kind of take on what your vision for the future of obesity research is, and maybe thinking about what the role for academic science versus biotech and or pharmaceutical companies, some combination of these, kind of big picture, what are you seeing things move towards, and is that successful, or do you think there needs to be some changes? Terry, let's start with you. Oh, great.
So I'm a clinician. I still see patients. I still see
Awesome.
people with type 2 diabetes and obesity. I managed to work that out. I think there are a lot of challenges. I think we need more drugs. There is no doubt about that, because as good as all those, you know, semaglutide, retaglutide, dulaglutide are in terms of losing weight, as soon as those drugs are stopped, the weight gain comes right back. So you're looking at facing, you know, like, am I going to take this for 40 years? Or versus, am I going to have bariatric surgery versus, you know, are there other drugs? The other thing that I'm finding clinically, and it's the data starting to come out, that there are people who do fantastically well on GLP-1 receptor agonists, and there are people who about a month later call you up and they hate you because you have now made them nauseous continuously. No offense, Bharath. I mean, I've seen great results from those people who just don't want to go there. So we definitely need more drugs. I think there's a bit of too much attention, and I don't know if the Obesity Society can actually shift it on things like ultra processed foods. That's not what's causing obesity, because we've got obesity in the United States. We now have it in India. We've got it in minority populations. We've got it in educated populations. It's really more like how do we get people to learn? I happen to eat crackers, like Wassa crackers, which honestly taste like cardboard. I don't know how anybody could get obese on those, but how are we going to tax processed food? So I think we need research. I think that the advocacy should really shift to education and less to like so there's some magical diet out there that's going to save everybody from becoming obese. And I think we also need advocacy to accept that most people don't want to be obese. It's not like I want to weigh 300 pounds. It's more like this happened to me and how do I solve it? So yeah, I think there are a lot of issues. Advocacy and education and more research are definitely there. But I think I would not. Nutritional research I view it as the great pit of, I'm sorry. It's like, yes, you're not gonna get thin eating a ketogenic diet. Thank you for letting me say that.
Mark, what's your take on that? And then also just where the future of obesity research needs to go?
Well, it's actually very interesting because the FDA and their position changes considerably on these things. And that I remember like 15 years ago, we had possible therapeutics in this space. We were dictated by the FDA not to dose, to induce nausea in patients. And now we find that, some of the most effective therapeutics in the obesity space are really firmly directed towards this mechanism. So there's a shift in the landscape. I would really like to see a change in how the FDA is adjudicating this, and I'd love to see that they look at effective weight loss and sort of beneficial weight loss for like cardiovascular outcomes, which they're starting to emerge, and also beneficial weight loss as in preservation of muscle mass and reduction in adiposity. So all those things are only going to come by what Terry said: discovery, research, new mechanisms of action, identification of new possible targets within the CNS that are amenable to this, and hopefully, maybe Pfizer or maybe Regeneron will come up with that next hit.
Awesome. Aaron, what do you think?
All right, I want to save time in the last minute for Bharath also, but I think we need to know more patient stratification and how to actually serve these patients. I mean, I think if you look in the successful drugs that are on market now, if you dig into the clinical data, I mean, your top end body weight loss were in the order of maybe 55% of the patients in the phase 2 and phase 3 trials. So you still have 40 to 45% of the other patient cohort that's being underserved by the medications. In obesity, it's polygenic, it's polymorphic. So like Terry said, we need more drugs. I think the other piece that's it's a challenge. I know there's people looking at this, but if there's ways to also, like we have the GalNAc siRNAs to target knockdown in the liver, advances in that field of the RNA delivery to specific organs, I think would really open a lot of new therapeutic options if we can get them specifically to those in humans. That's kind of the Wild West, though, because there's not a lot of regulatory path on that right now.
All right, Bharath, you're up. Bring us home.
Yeah, so what I was going to say is we have been trying to find good anti-obesity medications for over a century. And now we are at a point where there are, despite what Terry said, some nausea-inducing anti-obesity drugs are at least effective to a great degree, and there is a very, very bright future for developing anti-obesity drugs to cater for patients. So on the brighter side of things, particularly related to this forum, there is real excitement in anti-obesity drug because of some successful drugs that are already in the market, and there is a lot more potential for good drugs that could make it to the market from several companies that are represented here. That being said, there will be a lot of opportunities in the cardiometabolic space in the future. Novo, for example, has 3 open positions right now in Lexington. There will be at least 15 more positions. So there is real excitement. So if you are looking for jobs in cardiometabolic space, you are in a good time to search for those jobs in the industry right now.
Yeah, I agree. I think of obesity as being in the infancy in terms of therapies. And if you look back at the diabetes field, over the past 20 years, we went through multiple classes of drugs: insulin, TZDs, DPP-4s, GLP-1s, SGLT2s, and we still don't have, probably half of type 2 diabetics reaching their goal. So I think obesity is going to be the same. It's a monogenic disease. I completely agree with subtype classification. Not all obesity is the same. We need to work with the FDA and be clever about things like reducing visceral adiposity, even though that's not a registrable endpoint, because it's probably one of the biggest ways you can improve your risk for cardiometabolic outcomes. It matters. So I think, it's just early days, and it's a very exciting time.
How do you get it as a registerable endpoint? Because I completely agree with you. It's like central obesity, visceral obesity, bad.
Insulin sensitivity, but then you have to convince your company that you're not doing diabetes if that's off strategy. It's tough. It's tough.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. We appreciate your time and all of your honest answers to these questions. I know some of them are more complex than what we kind of narrowed them down to in this short questionnaire, but we really appreciate you all being here. I think it's informative for everybody, no matter your career stage. I found that a lot of the answers to these questions was informative for me, and I know a lot of trainees at various levels, based on the chat, seem to have found a lot of good information from this. So thank you all.
Thanks for including us. Me, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the invite. Great to meet
Thanks,
everybody.
everyone.
Awesome.
Thank you. Bye.
See you.